Good evening, folks. In keeping with my effort to keep those interested in the refugee program for South Africans suffering from racial persecution, unjust racial persecution, it's necessary to give an update that came out as a consequence of the attack on the National Guard soldiers in Washington, D.C. Specifically, as a consequence of that, the Trump administration has made some changes to the policy handbook for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. And this is related to the employment authorization document. The impact here on South African refugees is significant in that it will become burdensome for you to continue to have authorization approval. All South African refugees who arrive in the States need to pay very close attention to what I'm saying right now. Now, this can change at any time, but you need to pay very close attention to what I'm saying, all right? Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a bind. This is effective December 4th, 2025, so just a couple of days ago. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services updated its policy manual to reduce the maximum validity period for employment authorization documents for certain categories of aliens. And EAD is the paperwork you need to be allowed to work in America. Since you're not a permanent resident, you're not a citizen, you have to have something that allows you to work, and that's an EAD. This update also incorporates changes to EAD validity periods made by recent legislation to ensure proper vetting and screening of aliens. Now, that portion comes from Big Beautiful Bill. It's not going to affect you directly, but this policy change will. The reduced maximum validity periods for certain categories will result in more frequent vetting of aliens who apply for authorization to work in the United States. Vetting an alien more often will enable USCIS to deter fraud and detect aliens with potentially harmful intent so they can be processed for removal from the United States. Now, before you get too excited about that, understand that there are a lot of refugees in this country. I've run through the totals, hundreds of thousands of people who are currently under refugee status living in America. Not to mention 2.4 million people here are currently under asylum consideration, who have, many of them have EADs. So it will take them a long time to do these checks, and I don't think they're resourced properly to do it. So much like my security clearance, my top-level security clearance, which is supposed to be reinvestigated every 5 years, but because they had insufficient investigators when they changed the way that they're investigating, that led to a huge backlog. And so there was a period of 9 years where my investigation wasn't updated. That may be the case here. You may have a reduced period of eligibility, and I don't know the impact of that. Will you get a stamp that says it's only good for this long and then you have to wait for them to renew it? Or do they allow you to stay until they continue working until they reinvestigate? I'm not sure. But this is what they said. Reducing the maximum validity period for employment authorization will ensure that those seeking to work in the United States do not threaten public safety or promote harmful anti-American ideologies. After the attack on National Guard service members in our nation's capital by an alien who was admitted into this country by the previous administration, it's even more clear that USCIS must conduct frequent vetting of aliens, said Director Joseph Edlow. And this is what matters to South African refugees. The maximum validity period for initial and renewal EADs will be changed from 5 years to 18 months for several categories of aliens. 5 years to 18 months. Now, this is a huge administrative burden and a massive investigating requirement. I'm not sure how they're going to pull this off at USCIS. Maybe they're going to be employing a bunch of people. I don't know. This affects aliens who've been admitted as refugees. So for the South Africans, you are aliens admitted here as refugees. This affects you. So everyone who has an employment authorization document that has come here recently will now be forced to only get one for 18 months. That's significant. It also affects aliens granted asylum. Now, the change affects aliens with applications for employment authorization that are pending right now or filed on or after 5 December. So if you're already an American, you already have an employment authorization document. In other words, you were part of the first batch of 59ers, those that came subsequently. You got a Social Security number. You got your EAD. You're good for 5 years. You're good for 5 years. But everyone else that doesn't get their EAD until after 5 December 2025 will now get it for 18 months. That's it. Now, that doesn't mean it's over at the end of 18 months. It doesn't affect your refugee status. It just means you weren't authorized to work. This is going to prove to be quite a burdensome administrative headache, and I don't think that this is going to stand up for very long. They're going to have to adjust this. Either that or what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to say if you have the EAD, you're subject to reinvestigation 18 months, but your EAD is still valid until we complete a reinvestigation, and then we'll start your clock again or we'll turn you down. I suspect that's what's going to happen. Now, as required by H.R. 1, House Resolution 1, the Big Beautiful Bill Act, Public Law 119-21, 139, Statute 72, H.R. 1, signed into law on July 4th, 2025. The validity period for initial and renewal employment authorization documents will be 1 year or the end of the date authorized parole during a period of temporary protected status, whichever is shorter. And that affects people who are aliens with TPS who are then paroled as refugees or granted TPS or granted parole. It doesn't affect the South Africans. The bottom line for you is now your employment authorization document, anyone that gets it after the 5th or after the 4th of December 2025, it's only for 18 months. Now, what does that mean in a practical standpoint for South Africans? As I said, I think that bottom line is that they don't have the resources to do these investigations. They've already been told to revet 233,000 refugees admitted during the Biden regime alone. That is going to take ages to do. Trust me, I know. I was the person that did these investigations for security clearances. Among many things I've done in the military. Security clearance background investigations is what counterintelligence agents do, one of their main tasks, or one of their important tasks. And so I've done these investigations. It takes a lot of time to do that. And the refugee investigations are just almost as intensive as they are for top security clearance. So I'm not sure they're going to be able to pull this off. But the bottom line is the law, the policy, I should say, has changed, and they're saying it's 18 months. So policies can be adjusted any time. They can push it back to 2 years or 2.5 years or 5 years. But for now, to send a message, they've reduced it to 18 months. So that will affect people for the first time in 2027. Let's say you got your authorization on the 5th of December 2025, so 12 months, 5th December 2026. Another 6 months would take you into May of 2027. So it's a while before it affects you, but you need to understand that it will affect you. So you need to be saving money when you get here. If you have any money you can squirrel and set aside, you need to put aside in case there comes a period where you have a lapse in work because of this. I don't know how it's going to play out, but that's the bottom line. This is important information for South Africans aspiring to be refugees in the United States because they're suffering from unjust racial discrimination or persecution. There you go. All right, folks. Cheers.